Most people are not stuck because they lack potential. They are stuck because they believe their limits are real. Have you ever had this feeling? You wake up in the morning and for a moment everything feels the same as yesterday. The same thoughts, the same routines. And somewhere in the background there is this quiet feeling that nothing is really changing. You go through the day, you do what needs to be done. Maybe you even think about doing more, about changing something, about finally moving forward. But at the end of the day, when things calm down, you realize you are still in the same place. And then a question appears, not always loudly, sometimes very quietly. Why do I feel stuck in life? Why can't I move forward even when I try? And most people start looking for the answer outside, in circumstances, in other people, in time, money, and opportunities. But very often the real limitation is not outside, it is inside your mind. The greatest limitation of the mind and of a person is that it becomes trapped in its own patterns of thinking. Over time, these patterns become so natural that you no longer question them. You don't see them as patterns anymore, you see them as reality. And that is where most people get stuck. Not because they don't have potential, but because they accept certain limits as something normal, something fixed, something that cannot really be changed. Slowly, without even realizing it, they start operating inside a smaller version of themselves. What is interesting is that these limits don't show up in some dramatic way. They show up as very simple thoughts. Thoughts that feel completely normal. I am not enough. I am not smart enough. I don't have what it takes. It is too late for me. I don't have enough time. If I try, I will fail. People will judge me. Others are better than me. This is just who I am. These thoughts don't feel like limitations, they feel like facts. That is exactly why they are so powerful. Now, if we go one step further, most people actually don't have a problem imagining something more. It is easy to say, I want to have a better life. I want more freedom. I want to build something. I want to achieve something more. The difficulty is not in imagination. The difficulty is in belief. Because very quickly another voice appears, a quieter one, but much stronger. This is probably not for you, and that is where the conflict starts. On one side, you want more. On the other side, you don't really believe it is possible for you. And this is exactly where people get stuck. At this point, many people try to solve this problem in a very simple way. They start repeating things to themselves. They use affirmations. They visualize the outcome. They try to convince themselves that things will be different. And for a short time, this can work. It can create a feeling of movement. It can create motivation. But very quickly, the mind returns to its old patterns. The reason is simple. The mind is not easily convinced by words alone. It compares what you are saying with what you have already experienced in your life. And if there is a strong difference between the two, it will always return to what feels familiar. That is why repetition alone is not enough. You can tell yourself something 100 times, but if your experience does not support it, the mind will not accept it. This is why a deeper understanding of the mind is necessary. Many people talk about influencing the subconscious, and I agree with that. It is necessary to create patterns that become part of your subconscious mind. But these patterns are not created only by thinking differently. They are created by experience, and experience comes through action. Not more action, not a short period of motivation, but constant action over time. This is the part most people underestimate, because constant action is not exciting, it is not dramatic, it does not give immediate results. And because of that, people stop too early. They expect that once they understand something, things will immediately change. But understanding is only the first step. Real change comes later. It comes through repetition of action, through small steps, through situations where you act differently than before. At the beginning, these steps feel small. Sometimes they even feel meaningless. They may feel like nothing is happening. But slowly something starts to build. The mind begins to recognize a new pattern, not because you told it to change, but because you showed it something different again and again. And this is where belief slowly begins to change. At the same time, it is important that your goals are realistic and meaningful. If they are completely disconnected from your current situation, the mind will reject them immediately. It is also important to understand why you want something. If the reason is only ego, validation, or comparison with others, the foundation is weak. Money, success, and status are not the real goal, at least not from my perspective. They are tools. What matters is what you build, what you create, and how you grow through the process. When things become more concrete, the process becomes clearer. You are no longer chasing an idea. You are building something real. And then something interesting happens. The process starts to reveal itself. At the beginning, you don't see the full picture. You only see the next step. But if you continue step by step, things begin to connect. What once seemed impossible starts to become realistic. What once felt far away starts to become closer. This does not happen overnight. In most cases, it takes months, very often even years. But if you stay on the path, the direction becomes clearer and the mind slowly begins to accept that something new is possible. There is one more thought that keeps people stuck more than almost anything else. It sounds simple, it sounds harmless, but it is very powerful. This is just who I am. At first, this can sound like honesty, like self-acceptance, like you finally understand yourself. But in reality, very often, it is a defense mechanism. It protects your current patterns. It protects your comfort zone. It protects you from change. People use this sentence when they don't want to step out of what feels familiar, when they don't want to take responsibility for something more, when they feel uncertainty, pressure, or discomfort. Over time, this way of thinking becomes fixed. It becomes part of identity. But there is the important part. Most of these patterns were not created consciously. They were shaped over time by your past, by your family, by your environment, by repeated situations and experiences. What you now experience as your personality is to a large extent a collection of learned responses. And once you start to see that, something changes. You begin to understand that what feels fixed may not actually be fixed. In my own experience, many of my patterns were shaped by my past and by the environments I was part of. For a long time, I didn't question them. I simply acted according to them. Only later did I begin to recognize these patterns were not necessarily aligned to who I wanted to become. That realization did not immediately change anything, but it opened doors. Awareness is always the first step. Once you start recognizing your patterns, your reactions and the beliefs behind them, you create distance from them. You are no longer completely identified with them. And that distance is what allows change to happen. This does not mean that change will be fast. In most cases, it will take time. Patterns that were built over years or decades do not disappear in few weeks. But once you see them clearly, they no longer control you in the same way. You begin to have a choice, and that is the point. Not to become someone completely different, but to stop being limited by patterns you never consciously choose. To slowly change the way you think, the way you respond, and the way you act. And through that, to change the direction of your life. And there is one more thing that is important to understand. The limits you feel are not the real limits. They're only the limits your mind has accepted over time. In reality, those limits are much higher than you think. Much higher. The problem is that most people never question them. They simply adapt to them. Over time, these limitations become normal. They become part of everyday thinking, part of identity, part of how a person sees themselves and the world. And once something becomes normal, it is no longer questioned. At the same time, it is important to understand that everyone has these patterns. There is no exception. Some people have stronger limitations, others less. But we are all operating within certain boundaries that were created through our past and our environment and our experiences. That is why comparing yourself to others is often misleading. You don't see their internal limits, you only see their external results. Another important point is this: change does not happen quickly. Many people expect that once they understand something, things will immediately shift. But understanding is only the first step. Real change happens later. It happens through repeated action, through time, through situations where you act differently again and again. Sometimes it takes years before a person truly sees how their mind works and begins to change in a more meaningful way. It is also important that your goals are realistic and meaningful. If they are completely disconnected from your current situation, the mind will reject them. And if they are based only on ego or validation, they will not hold long enough to create real change. Money, success, and status are not the goal. They are tools. What matters is what you build, what you create, and how you grow through the process. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. The process starts to reveal itself. At the beginning, you don't see the full picture. You only see the next step. But if you continue step by step, things begin to connect. What once seemed impossible starts to be realistic. What once felt far away starts to come closer. That is the shift. Not something sudden, not something dramatic. And there is the truth most people avoid. You are not stuck because you cannot do more. You are stuck because you stopped questioning your limits. For years, maybe decades, you accepted certain thoughts as facts. You build your life inside those limits, and now it feels normal. But normal does not mean true. That moment you start questioning what you believe is possible, and everything begins to shift. Not instantly, not dramatically, but step by step your actions change, your patterns change, and your life follows. So the real question is not why am I stuck? The real question is what if your limits are not real? And what would you do if you stopped believing they are?